Digital intimacy is a part of many people's sexual experiences as we live in a world where we use technology for so many things. This can include activities such as sending nudes or sliding into DMs. However, just as consent is required for in-person sexual activities, you also must have consent for digital intimacy too. It is not okay to share nudes without consent or to send explicit images without consent either. And this is actually known as cyber flashing. So why do we call it IBSA? Well, you might have heard the term revenge porn being used to describe the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. But did you know that this is actually the wrong term? This kind of content is not porn. Porn is very different. It's filmed consensually by professional workers who do that for a job. Calling this porn equates it with entertainment, and it's not entertaining to cause harm to someone. The images might also depict sexual assault or be taken without somebody's knowledge. So it is better to call this activity what it really is, image-based sexual abuse, as it involves using images to abuse somebody. This also includes threats to share images without consent. And image-based abuse is also known as IBSA, or intimate image abuse. So IBSA is a violation of bodily autonomy, privacy, consent, and boundaries. So it can have the same impact as other forms of sexual violence. And it is important to remember that sexual violence can take many different forms, and it is a spectrum of activity. IBSA is a form of violence alongside sexual violence and domestic violence, and actually it is often linked to the same methods used in these forms of violence, such as blackmail and coercion, and often with the same goal of causing trauma and silencing the victim. So how does IBSA happen? Well, there are a few different ways that people can violate consent using images. One common way is sharing content to WhatsApp groups, to friends who actually might not consent to being involved in this abuse. And we might also remember the media coverage of the Discord server leaks in 2020, which saw hundreds of thousands of images being leaked and caused a lot of harm to victims. Victims have reported their images being shared by exes, friends, or even strangers. And both victims and perpetrators have been all genders and sexualities. Now, victims might experience many different mental health issues, such as anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide, PTSD, or even eating disorders. And there are also physical impacts on victims of IBSA. Cortisol is our stress hormone, and it can be triggered when we're stressed, and this can result in a whole range of issues from gastrointestinal issues, weight gain, high blood pressure, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and other chronic diseases. And victims might also experience relationship issues, such as, their trust being violated, so they don't want to even get into a relationship, or having difficulties communicating or being present in a relationship. IBSA is now thankfully illegal in Ireland, and the law that covers this is called the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Act. This was enacted in 2020 and came into force in February 2021. It is also known as Coco's Law, after a young girl called Nicole died by suicide as a result of relentless online abuse, and her family have been campaigning for this law to come into place. This law also covers deep fakes and stealing content from platforms such as OnlyFans. The law creates an offence that deals with the taking, distribution, publication, or threat to distribute intimate images without consent and with intent to cause harm to the victim. And this will carry a maximum penalty of an unlimited fine and/or 7 years imprisonment. And there is another part to this law that says that it will be irrelevant if a person may have consented to the taking of an image, if it is subsequently published or distributed without their consent. So the focus is not on the person who took the photo, all the focus is on the person who shared that photo without their consent. Additionally, It will also be an aggravating factor for sentencing if the perpetrator of the offence is or was in an intimate relationship with the victim of the offence, because we know that's even more of a betrayal. And if you live in Northern Ireland, IBSA is illegal under section 51 to 53 of the Justice Act, Northern Ireland, which was passed in 2016. Anybody could be a victim of IBSA regardless of their age, their gender, or their sexuality. So here are some tips to help if it happens to you. You can contact hotline.ie to file a report, and you can also have the Gardaí work with you to address this issue. You can also take screenshots of any content that is online, but try and include the URL, which is another word for the website address, the times, the dates of when it was posted, and any details of who it was posted by. Keep copies of any public or private messages, especially those of a threatening nature, together with the dates and times that they were sent. And if your images appear on a social media site, you can contact the platform and ask them to take the image down. Social media companies have dedicated teams to tackle this and will generally work quite fast to take the image down. And if you would like support to talk about this, you can contact your local Rape Crisis Centre, Women's Aid, or Men's Aid, and they will offer support to help you through this time. Now, some people who may not understand the harm caused by IBSA, they may say things that are really victim-blaming statements. They may say things like, just don't send nudes, or it's your fault for sending them in the first place, or no one made you send them, or it's no big deal. But actually, this can be really harmful to victims and cause them further trauma and minimize their pain. Remember, it's never the fault of the victim, but always the fault of the person who chose to share those images without consent. The focus should always be on the person who chose to harm somebody else. And it's important to remember that this is a sexual offence, and the actions of the perpetrator is what needs to be looked at rather than the actions of the victim. And sometimes you might hear people saying, well, they shouldn't have taken those images in the first place. Here are some examples of ways that you can call that out. You could say, well, the person shouldn't have shared those without the sender's consent, or it's not their fault that they were shared without consent. They trusted that person, but it's not their fault that that person chose to violate their consent. Or why are you defending somebody who's caused harm? That might make that person reflect on what they are saying. So it's important to remember that sexual abuse is a spectrum and can happen in person or online, and neither are okay. And we must remember that consent is ongoing, mutual, and freely given. And to learn more about this, you can look at the other videos on consenthub.ie. You can listen to our podcast called Green Light, and you can take our e-learning module. And together, we can all play a part in building consent culture in Ireland.